Good evening and welcome to the Writer's Block. I'm your host, John Ronan, and as you know now, because we are well into our 36th season, I talk to writers about their craft, what they're working on, what they've accomplished in the past, what they're planning for the future. It's a slightly wider net than writers, however. We have had on painters, we've had on sculptors, we've had on actors. So if you have an idea for a writer or other brand of artist who might be a good fit for this program, we'd be glad to get your suggestions. Watch for our address at the end of the show. I also want to remind you that the Writer's Block and all the other original programming that comes out of 1623 Studios is a result of cable access television. It's a very, very valuable community asset that you don't get with other means of accessing the internet. So stick with cable, stick with the Writer's Block. Tonight, I'm very happy to say we do have a writer. His name is George Grimes, or you may know him as Captain George Grimes, a Rockport student, son of Rockport, who has returned to Rockport after sailing several times around the world. And he's going to share much of those experiences today while we talk about his book, Water Under the Keel. I'm going to finish this introduction of George before we meet him by reading a brief paragraph that appears on the back of the book, Water Under the Keel. Captain George Grimes, a licensed master mariner, has extensive seagoing experience navigating steam, motor, towing, and auxiliary sail fishing vessels. When at home, he enjoys rowing, sailing, and photography. Captain Grimes grew up in Rockport, Massachusetts, where he now lives with his wife, Sally, and his golden retriever, Sydney. They have two grown daughters, Kristen and Caitlin. He can be reached at BOCEAN, that's BOcean, at Comcast.net. George, welcome to the Writer's Block.
Great to be here. Pleasure to meet you.
I was fascinated by this book because, as I mentioned before we went on, the contrast between your background in Rockport, on Cape Ann here, a very, very secure, nurturing environment, and then you're propelled because of your career into places like Calcutta, which is so different in climate and race and language that it's almost unimaginable.
That's
although
true.
You can imagine it because you were there. Can you tell us something about your background and your interest in the sea?
Yeah, I grew up in Rockport as a child, and my family's been in the area since 1702. It goes back to the Gott family. And my dad had a little 7-foot rowboat when I was 7 years old, and he let me use it. And I spent hours in that rowboat poking around under the pylons on T Wharf and under the blacksmith shop and that type of thing. And then later he noticed my distinct love for sailing, and there was a boat called a turnabout, 11-foot sailboat, a little plywood sailboat, and he gave me a choice. He said I can either have the motorboat and he'd teach me how to run his motorboat, or I can have the turnabout. And I said, that's a no-brainer, give me the turnabout. So I did that for 4 years. But the main thing that I emphasize in the book that had a distinct, really a profound effect was Sea Scouts. Rockport had
You have a chapter on sea.
Yes, Rockport had a Sea Scout group, and at that time in the 60s, the late 60s, no, 61, I graduated, late 50s, there were Sea Scout ships in Gloucester, Ipswich, Beverly, Salem, Marblehead, Rockport, and we used to gather together for regattas. One regatta I remember distinctly here at the Stagefort Park, and where all the ships would come together, and they'd each have a tent, and we'd have events. So we'd have rowing races, semaphore races, blinker light, all kinds of competition, tug of war, and that type of thing. But we had a couple of leaders that took me under their wing, and guided me through the early stages of youth where I was a kind of a little wise guy. And one of them particularly took me aside and straightened me out and really made a difference. So,
Well, that background, which you loved automatically, seems to have been in your blood. And a couple of the paragraphs that I was struck by in the early going in this book are about that background. And I wondered if you could read just a paragraph or two from page 13, Family History.
sure. Page 13, let's see what we got. Family history. There have been 4 master mariners, including myself, in the most recent 6 generations on my father's side of the family. Captain Joseph Stickney, who was born in Boxford, Massachusetts on October 5th, 1767, died on March 23rd, 1817, was a master mariner in the employ of the Honorable Israel Thorndike of Beverly, Mass, as early as 1809. His son, Captain John Stickney, was born in Beverly on March 19, 1799, and died as a master mariner on board the brig Planet of Salem. His body rests in peace on the island of Rio Nunez off the northwest African coast. Captain John Edward Stickney, who was the son of Captain John Stickney, was born on January 26, 1839, in Beverly, and died on May 24, 1912. He served with distinction during the Civil War on board Lehigh-class gunboats, which were similar in construction to the famous ironclad Monitor. He delivered several British prizes to Key West, Florida, ships captured by the Union Navy in its blockade of southern ports. His remains are interred on the Stickney family plot in Beverly, along with those of his daughter, Grace, my father's mother, and her husband, George Bragdon Grimes, whose first name I was given at baptism.
I think that's a wonderful introduction to the book. And there's a piece of really nice writing in this when you talk about the most recent 6 generations of your family. I love that implication that there was many more before, there'll be many more after, but we're part of history, and we're not the center of the universe. We're part of its long history. Very, very nicely done.
Well, thank you. Yeah.
Now, you mentioned the Scouts.
Yes.
Can you talk now about you're going to the Maritime Academy?
Yes. Well, I have to admit that through high school I didn't really apply myself academically as well as I could have, and my grades were not great. However, I did decide that I knew I wanted to go to sea at the age of 14. And it's very strange that a young person would definitely know that he was going to go to sea, but I did. I just had that feeling. So I applied to Massachusetts Maritime Academy, and I got the thin letter in the mail that we all dread when we apply to college, that my results of the entrance exam didn't quite come high enough, because at that time Mass Maritime was a very small school. So I realized that 2 of my fellow Sea Scouts were accepted to Maine Maritime Academy. And I knew what kind of grades they were getting. And they were very similar to my grades. So I said to myself, all right, I'm going to go for it. So I did, and I got accepted. I had a plan B, however. I intended to join the Coast Guard. I was going to enlist in the Coast Guard, and I was going to try to work my way through into the Coast Guard Academy. But I didn't have to go that route.
So you went to the Maine Academy, which is in Castine.
That's right.
I've never been in Castine. It's going to be on my next list for visiting Maine.
Right.
Because I was reading up about it. How was that experience?
Well, it was an interesting experience. I was scared. I was a young kid right out of high school. I knew it was a military academy. I didn't know what I was in for, but I did know a friend of mine, a friend of my brother's, older fellow in Rockport, who had just graduated from there, and I got a briefing from him, and he summed it up pretty well. He said, "I'll tell you how to get by at Maine Maritime Academy. keep it straight ahead, keep your mouth shut, and do as you're told. And I never forgot that. I kept it in mind, and it's helped later on in married life too, I think.
Do what you're told. Huh?
Just kidding around. My wife and I have been married happily for 52 years, so we get along fine. A lot of people ask me, what's your secret in the 52 years of marriage? I said, well, I don't know. It might have something to do with I was gone to sea for half the time. Just kidding around. But no, Maine Maritime Academy, I went in as a freshman, and the first week, we went in through strict indoctrination, and I can remember the day in ranks when they come up and make you hit a brace and suck your chest in and chin down, and all the wise guys next to me. There was one fellow next to me whose first name was Rock. I won't tell you his last name, but his first name was Rock. And they asked him, what's your name, mister? He said, Rock, R-O-C-K, hard, isn't it, sir? Well, I knew he was on his way down to the bilge in the training ship, and he spent a good deal of time in the bilge. But I remembered, when he said that, I remember those words, keep it straight ahead, keep your mouth shut, do what you're told.
So this is a very strict military...
at that time it was. Now it's branched out. Now they have... the enrollment was down, and the job opportunities aren't that available as they were then. Of course, when I graduated, the Vietnam War was escalating, and they were crying for people for the ships. So I had no problem getting a job. But there was probably about a 3 months indoctrination. There were many weekends where I hitchhiked home after that. Believe it or not, hitchhiking 5.5-hour drive. I would leave after inspection at 2 in the afternoon from Castine, and I'd probably be coming through 5 corners about 10 o'clock that night. And then I'd have to turn around noon on Sunday and go back again.
That's interesting, because at our age, you can remember safe hitchhiking, pretty much. I hitchhiked quite a bit.
Oh, yeah.
I wouldn't dare tell anybody to hitchhike today.
I don't recall, but I'm pretty sure I've got a couple of stories in the book about the hitchhiking.
Yeah, you mentioned it.
I think I did, yeah.
So what year did you graduate from Maine Maritime?
I graduated in 1965. At that time, it was a 4-year course. My class was the second class. They were, previous to the year before me, the class before me, they were a 3-year course. Then they changed. So we really got lucky. We had a year with a whole class of upperclassmen that we didn't have to worry about being hazed by, because they skipped a year because they were changing the time cycle. So that was good.
So then you graduated, and then you jumped into your professional career.
Yeah.
Which went on 4 or 5 decades?
That's correct. I switched around different jobs, different positions. My first job came about because there was a fellow that came from American Export Branson Line. He came down to the school, and he came to my class, and he said, how many of you want to work with us? And 6 of us raised our hand. And so he said, well, you're going to graduate Saturday. Come down Monday, and we'll have you on a ship in less than a week. And he wasn't lying. But that following Friday, I found myself on the wing of the bridge with the captain and the pilot. As the pilot's saying goodbye to the captain and he leaves the ship, the captain turned to me and said, Mr. Grimes, you got it. And then I realized, this is for real. I've got ships coming at me from 3 different directions, and I've got to handle this. But of course I knew.
This is in New York.
New York Harbor, yeah. That was when the Ambrose, I think the lightship was, well, maybe the Tower was there, I don't recall. I think it was the Tower. But I knew that the captain was most likely down in his room looking out the porthole, keeping an eye on things. But I think that was his way of, giving it to me right away.
I remember you mentioning going to New York and staying at the Continental, and you thought that was going to be a fancy hotel.
That's correct. You read the book. Yeah,
it was not a fancy hotel.
No, you read the book thoroughly. That's true. They're going to put you up at the Continental Hotel. Oh wow, that's impressive. And no, it wasn't. It was right up the street by the Clambroth House, pub and restaurant. And the Clam Broth House was a very interesting place too. I don't think it exists now, but there were 3 stages in the dining room. There was the animal stage, or the bar room with the clamshells. You had to crunch on the clamshells as you walked through. And then there was the fancy restaurant, and there was kind of the middle dining room stage.
So this for a young Rockport kid, this is like the world's exploding
Right.
in front of you.
That's right, and you know, it's amazing you bring that up, because only 3 days ago, my wife and I were sitting after breakfast, and I was thinking, what a switch I made. I came from a not secluded, but a protected, relatively, life in Rockport growing up as a kid, and then all of a sudden, I'm exposed to all these cultures from everywhere in the world. I mean, the first run that I made was a 4.5-month voyage around the world, literally.
So this is right after graduation, John.
That's
so
right.
Tell us about that run.
Well, we left Ambrose, as I told you, and we were straight through the Azores. They called it the hole in the wall. There were Corvo and Flores, 2 islands in the Azores. We'd shoot through there as a navigation aid. We had a section, of course, but anyway, they like to go through there. Then we'd go down to usually Barcelona in Spain or Seville, and then we'd go into the Mediterranean, and we always stopped at a Italian port, Rome or Naples, Catania, Sicily. Then we'd go down to, a lot of times we'd go to Cyprus, and they had an interesting situation in those days where the export line ships could only stop, like if you went to an Israeli port, you weren't allowed to do a Arabian port, because the war footing. And then the next ship would go to the Arab port and not the Israeli port.
You mentioned sometimes we'd stop at Cyprus, sometimes we'd go there. So you went around the world many times.
Well, I actually did the round the world per se twice in my first year. However, I went like around the world 3/4 of the way and then 3/4 of the way back on military charter on a ship called the Sir John Franklin, which is a C-1 Maritime Commission class ship. And we were on military charter carrying ammunition and military supplies to Vietnam. We stopped at the ports Saigon, Nha Trang, Cam Ranh Bay, and we delivered rocket ammunition. And
did you have time to stop and get into these ports and
Well-
see what there was to see?
well, the way they had it set up, we stood normally at sea 4 hours on and 8 hours off. However, when you came into port, you went on to 8-hour shifts. So that if you were lucky enough to come into port at perhaps 10 p.m., you would break sea watches at midnight. And if you were due to have the first 8-hour shift, you got really lucky because you were off at 8 o'clock in the morning until 4 the following afternoon. So that meant you had 30-something hours off. And I did get that experience several times, yeah. But in Vietnam, of course, there was not much tourism there. There was a war going on. In fact, there was a night where we were discharging cargo, and I saw a jet plane coming down firing tracer bullets through the night sky, and I said to the Army sergeant on duty, "Are they having training maneuvers there?" And he looked at me real serious. He said, "No, son, there's a war going on, and you're right in the middle of it. However, don't worry, they're not going to hurt you because the black market is getting probably half of the cargo on board the ship through the black market." So that's what, it was a crazy war, as we all know now. We were one of the first ships to go over there, and we thought we were going to go right in because we had military cargo. But what the captain didn't bank on is that we had loaded 3,000 tons of Italian toilet bowls in Italy, and it was overstowing the military cargo, which means that it was on top of the military cargo. So he thought we were going to go right in. Well, we did go right in after a couple of days, and he gloated over that and was real happy about it. And we went in and they took the 3,000 tons of toilet bowls and put it on the dock. They took what they wanted for the military, put the toilet bowls back on the ship. And back we went to anchor. We sat there at anchor for over a month, 31 days. Yeah.
Waiting to get rid of those?
Waiting to get in. Yeah.
Waiting to get in?
Waiting to get in, yeah.
Sounds worse than the Panama Canal.
Well, the
Wait
thing,
some
what
time.
was happening was that the war was escalating so quickly that what's the word I'm looking for? The logistics, I guess. It didn't build fast enough, so they couldn't handle the ships, and it took them a long time. They eventually, the following year, I was over there with the Sir John Franklin, and it was very much quicker because they had by that time put up temporary bases near the mouth of the river. Cameron Bay was one. I remember distinctly one experience, I think I mentioned it in the book, where we had pallets of rocket ammunition and we were offloading it into small amphibious vessels, maybe 50, 60 feet long. And we accidentally, one of the pallets slipped overboard and went to the bottom. And I was panicked because I thought, oh my God, somebody's gonna hang for that. And the Army fellow on duty said, don't worry, they'll never miss it. So that's the kind of thing that went on.
There's a box on your desk.
Yes.
That contains, where I want to get to the sextant. It's a sextant. Can you tell us what a sextant is and the story of the disappearance and then the return of that sextant?
Okay, I certainly will. Well, a sextant is your pride and joy. When you're a young third mate, the first thing you want to do is have your own sextant. And I did that as soon as I got to Hong Kong. I went ashore and I purchased this very sextant. And I took with it, it was always under the seat in front of me on the airplane. It never got checked. It was my pride and joy. If I lost my luggage, that's fine, but I wasn't going to lose my sextant, because that was how I was going to find my way. And you know, so many people depend now in small boats on GPS and satellite navigation and everything.
So, right, well, you were saying that that's a very, very high class.
Well, yeah,
sextant.
it's a German-made Plath, and on it you can see that it has a index arm, so it's right here, and the index arm has what they call a micrometer drum. And what happens is that the scale can only be read to whole degrees, and with the micrometer drum you have a device here where you can line up the two black lines, and you can read the minutes and seconds. And
the minutes and seconds for location.
well, no, actually, this is, I got ahead of myself, I'm afraid. This is the device which measures the angle of the sun above the horizon. And by finding the angle of the sun, you can go through a series of steps with your books and tables, and you can find a line of position. They call it a line of position, which is actually a section of a great circle. A great circle is a circle around the Earth, the center of which goes through the center of the Earth. So it's like you slice it right in half. You can slice it in half this way, any which way, but it's still a circle around the Earth. So it's such a big circle that what you come up with is a line. Now, there are easy sights. When I was third mate, I used to have to do the noon position sight, which only meant getting latitude.
I want to jump because we're getting very close to being out of time. You sold that at one point.
I did. I sold it because I wanted to get more money. I didn't have a whole lot of money. And my wife told me, you'll regret this, and I went ahead and sold it anyway. Many years later, I was in charge. I was sitting outside Sal's barber shop, waiting to get a haircut, and the gentleman was sitting next to me, and we were telling stories. And he mentioned that he had purchased a sextant from a fellow who was captain of a large sailing vessel. Well, I remembered right away that I was skipper of a boat called the When and If for 4 years, and I knew right away that he had my sextant. I purchased it back, and here it is, So I was very happy.
That's a great story. It's
Yeah.
one of the best, interesting stories in the book. That boomerang sexton came back.
Yeah, it sure did. Yeah.
We are almost out of time. We have about a minute and a half left.
Wow, that went fast.
It does go fast. I want to ask you a couple quick questions.
Mm-hmm.
If there are other sailors watching this and they want to write a book, what would you advise them to do to get
Well-
it written and get it published?
Well, the way I wrote mine is I just went over a period of 2 or 3 years and just putting memories down in bullets on my computer. And as I thought of a story, I'd jot it down, and then it kind of all just filled in together, and I was kind of filling in between the lines. I published it through a self-publishing company in Maine called Maine Authors Publishing, and they did a good job, and I can still, the book is available still at the bookstore in Gloucester on Main Street and at the Maritime Heritage on Harbor Loop.
So Maine has been a good state for you.
I love Maine. I would go to Maine in a minute. However, my wife, our grandchildren are only in Pigeon Cove, so there's no way I'm going to get my wife away from Rockport. I would go. I mean, I love my grandchildren just as much as she does, but I also love Maine too.
I know people are loyal to Rockport. We've had guests on, many guests over the years,
Yeah.
who were born and raised and are still in Rockport.
That's right.
And there's a couple of them married their high school sweethearts from Rockport, and they're raising their families in Rockport.
Yeah.
So that's not a kind of a storyline that you see too common in America these days.
That's true. Unfortunately, now the real estate being what it is, it's a difficult
Can't afford to be
situation.
here, yeah.
Yeah.
George Grimes, author of Water Under the Keel. I want to thank you very much for sharing a little bit of your adventuring around the world as a captain on different sorts of vessels and different sorts of destinations. Thanks for being with us.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
I want to thank you in TV land for being with us as well. If you've learned something about seafaring from Captain Grimes, then the Writer's Block has done its job. Thanks for being with us, and I hope to see you again next time on the Writer's Block. Good night.